Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time, we will continue our reading of The Demon Priest by Jim Burroughs. Retrospective 2, And So Ordained, 1914 to 1919. Years passed, and still the priest and the demon often met in their dreams every week or two. It seemed to Reverend Whitcomb that Sam changed slowly over time, became more balanced. Where he was once arrogant, now he seemed self-assured. His selfishness seemed tempered. He spoke often not only about his own fate, but that of others like him, the other Grigory and other sorts of fallen angels. He wondered about the fates of the Nephilim, the offspring of the Grigory and humans. Did any still exist? Were there humans with Nephil heritage? He did retain his devilish sense of humor, but even it was somewhat softened. One thing Sam didn't do, though, was age or change physically. He was the same red-skinned, goateed, handsome devil with horns and a tail. He still dressed in fine suits. Al, on the other hand, did age. He was older, heavier, graying at the temples. The researches sparked by the devil's questions resulted in an academic scholarship that was both recognized and respected by others. That contributed to his rise to bishop. And so it was that one day Bishop Allen Whitcomb met with the fallen angel Samuel, once known as Shamsiel, in a pub they shared in their dreams. "So what have you been up to, Sam?" "Traveling." "Where to?" "To and fro in many lands, in search of others of my kind and similar folk." "And what have you found?" "There are many of the Nephilim, descendants of the sons of God and the daughters of man, in and around Jinnistan. Like the jinn and humans, they each live their own lives, practice their own religions. They are unbound, uncondemned, so far as one can tell. They live longer than humans, but still there have been many generations, enough that none of them regard themselves as the offspring of any particular Grigory." "So you have found descendants of your people, but not explicitly yours?" "Yes, and they are doing well, living openly, largely in communities of their own folk, but mixing in the society of the half-lands and nearby realms. Though it is true never in the mortal lands, your home, at least so far as I know." The bishop smiled. "It might be hard to explain. How about the Grigory themselves?" Sam shook his head, then said, "None unbound, none but me. They are confined to the one realm, the land of our exile. None dare leave. I don't even see or hear of others who come here in their dreams. Others of the fallen from the great rebellion are abroad, but not my folk." "What do you do when you find them, the fallen, or Nephilim?" "Sometimes nothing. Sometimes we talk." "And do you travel in this form?" asked the bishop, making a sweeping gesture, taking in the devil from horns to tail. "No. I wear this form when you and I meet, because it is the one you know, and once I would have said it suits me, but now perhaps because it is more honest. It reminds me of my guilt, my past, and the role you had in changing my ways." "And to remind me what sort I'm willing to consort with?" "Perhaps a little," he said with his devilish grin, though truth to tell, even it was becoming more impish than devilish. The bishop took a long draught of his cider, then, looking his friend the demon in the eye, asked, "There's something going on that wicked mind of yours. What?" Sam smiled broadly. "You know me too well, old friend," he said. "'Tis no use trying to conceal things from you." The bishop nodded. I think I need to go back," said the devil. "Go back?" "To where I was bound, where we all were bound." "I'd have thought you were well rid of that place." "Oh, I am. The first eon or two was more than enough. I'd far, far sooner never see it again." "Then why?" "For them. the Watchers, the Grigori, and others. There are more bound there than just us, you know." I didn't. To be honest, until we met, I always took the talk of angels and demons, Nephilim and the rebellion in heaven, to be symbolic more than historical. Since knowing you, I've researched such things, but the tales are not well sourced. I tend to reflect more on the human messages of religion." "Well," said the demon, "there wasn't just the one rebellion in heaven. There was the great rebellion, your Lucifer. After that, there was a great fracturing among the hosts, the many beings you call angels. Many, most, stayed faithful to their traditions and laws. Some did not. Lesser beings arose as a result. There grew to be nations and races of heaven, what you once called spiritual or higher beings. Dragons, jinn, peris, fays, all arose unplanned. Some of them turned foul. One of the great dragons fell to be the one you know as Lilith, who corrupted the garden. My people, the Grigori, the Watchers, became enamored of the joys of the flesh. The Nephilim resulted. Higher powers forbade the lesser ones from mortal lands and bound those they judged to be the worst to realms of punishment and exile. We were watchers of the garden. There were others there with other duties of creation or preservation. Some of them strayed and rebelled as we did, and a few were bound with us, some for even lesser failings than our own, but the judgment of the powers was harsh and stiff." The demon paused and looked off into the distance beyond dream. "And you wish to see your bound brethren and the others, even though they have not repented, not even dreamed of another life?" The devil shook his head. "You do not know how strong those bindings are. Mere dreaming is such an effort." "Could you even leave there if you return?" "The truth is, I do not know." But what if I could bring hope, as you did?" "It might be as cruel and painful as my hope was to you." "True," said the demon with a huge sigh, "but if I could offer them not only hope, but forgiveness, then it would be less cruel. But can you?" "That's where you come in, my friend." "I thought you said no human could survive there." "True. And so, will you ordain me?" "Ordain you?" "A Grigori priest could bring them hope and shrive any who truly embraced repentance." "Heaven help us!" "Not directly in my experience, but perhaps through you." "And you?" "Well, it is a plan, perhaps a mad one that only you could have devised, but it is a plan." Is it that much madder than baptizing and shriving me?" "Quite possibly. Or not. Either way, 'tis a most sobering thought." "I assume that I would require you to instruct me at some length." "More than that. I would want you to enroll in a seminary and take the full course." "Oh, I had hoped that you could teach me." "This is a dicey enough proposition at its heart that I don't wish to cut any corners but one. For our friendship, and to honor your good intentions in this, yes, I will ordain you personally, but only if you meet all the requirements, except in, of course, being human." "What will that involve?" "The largest requirement will be your education. Assuming that you can come to Earth, the mortal lands, that would mean attending a seminary school for 3 years. Can you appear human?" The devil passed his hand down in front of his face, and as he did, the horns vanished and his skin lightened from its customary red to the pale complexion of a northern European. "Yes," he said. "And sustain it long term in the mortal lands?" "That remains to be seen, but quite probably." Walker and Samuel the Grigori arrived at the cathedral's rectory 2 days later. During the next few weeks, the bishop put the devil to the test, both quizzing him about his motives and intentions, and ensuring that he could maintain the role of the human identity that the three of them were building for him. Once he was fully confident that Sam could pass himself off as human and was genuine in his desire to do good, they enrolled him in a nearby seminary school. Over the next 3 years, Samuel Gregory proved to be an excellent student and prospect for the priesthood. After graduation, he was ordained a deacon. It would be at least 6 months before the bishop could ordain him as a priest, during which time he would need to prove himself in service. The United States had just entered the Great War, and Samuel decided to take a post overseas. At first, he considered serving as an assistant to a military chaplain, but that seemed unwise given the differences between human and devil. Instead, the bishop arranged for him to take a post as a deacon at the Holy Trinity Cathedral in Paris for a year. When his time in Paris was up, rather than return to the States, Samuel served for more than a year with the Red Cross and other aid agencies across Europe and even as far as Persia. With the war, the influenza pandemic, famines in Germany, Lebanon, and Persia, there was a lot for him to do. But late in 1919, he returned to the States and showed up on the bishop's doorstep. "A long time no see, old friend," said the bishop as he took the devil's hands. "Well, there have been dreams, Al." "Father, your grace." The devil smiled, but without the wicked edge Alan had once known. "You look tired. I'm not used to that," said the bishop. "A tiredness of the flesh and the spirit, I must confess," said Samuel. "Come in, stay for dinner. I'd offer you a drink, but Margaret, Mrs. Whitcomb, doesn't approve, and soon enough it won't be legal." He sighed. "Only in dreams from now on, I'm afraid." "I'd be happy to join you if it isn't an imposition on your wife," Samuel replied. "No, she enjoys having dinner guests," said the bishop as they made their way to his study. Once they were seated in comfortable leather chairs, he continued, "I'll have to say that you were as surprising as ever. I had not expected you to stay in Europe beyond your tour, let alone travel across the continent and into Asia." There always seemed to be someone who needed aid and comfort. The doughboys, then the victims of the war, the famines in Germany, the Levant and Persia. He shook his head. Starvation and disease as a weapon of war, and now influenza. It never seemed like the time to turn my back to return to you. The bishop leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Well," he said, "if I had any questions about your calling, the last couple of years would seem to allay them. You could have done the 6 months required, returned, spent a few weeks here, and been on your way. I'd have stood by our agreement. Instead, I keep getting letters from you about one group after another who needed your help." "I don't know that I'd say it was a calling. I just felt wrong to turn my back. Truth be told, Sam, very few of us are vouchsafed an explicit message or sign. For most of us, a calling is just what you described, a conviction that the only choice that we can make with good conscience is to go forward. I've ordained human priests with callings less clear." "That's good to hear, sir. Alan, I have worried that you might not want to go through with it. My calling, if that's what it was, always seemed to be to go back to my people, to see if I could bring them the same hope and choices that you brought me. However, in the event, I found myself unable to turn away from human suffering, and my fascination with how so much of it is brought about by human action. Blockades were the authors of the famines, Allies blockading Germany, the Ottomans blockading Persia. The influenza was born in military hospital camps, midwifed by the malnutrition and overcrowding produced by war and famine. Together, war and its brethren, famine and disease, brought death and suffering that touched the globe, all at human hands. The bishop reached out and laid his hand upon the devil's. Samuel sighed. I felt equal parts compelled to be of service, giving aid, and so enthralled by the inhuman human spectacle that I could not leave. I cannot say which motivated me the more. Was it the service? Then perhaps you are right, and I have a calling. But if the other, then 'tis no calling, but a sick and corrupt compulsion. It is all right, Samuel, my friend. Human motivations, our very nature, is complex, even contradictory. Humanity caused, suffered, and strove to prevent and cure those things you saw. In your reaction, you are little different from us. Most priests, and all the best ones, no doubt have the same feelings as you. That's why we pray, saying, We acknowledge and bewail our manifold sins and wickedness, which we from time to time most grievously have committed by thought, word, and deed against thy divine majesty, provoking most justly thy wrath and indignation against us. We do earnestly repent and are heartily sorry for these our misdoings. The remembrance of them is grievous unto us, the burden of them is intolerable. After a pause, the bishop continued. The burden is made tolerable through grace, through our service, both for those we serve, for whom we are the conduits of grace, forgiveness, and absolution, and for ourselves by being that conduit. Even for me, all this is so alien to me. As Grigory, we lived lives of absolutes, perfect service. Morality was not a question. And when we fell, it was entire, absolute. Our guilt was unquestionable, our fall complete. It was a life of black and white. I think that must be why the pleasures of flesh, of imperfection, of conflicting desires were so alluring. It had a subtlety, was filled with contradiction, and need not make sense. But now, these last few years, I see that it can also be senseless, conflicted. The bishop smiled with recognition, pride, and sympathy. He nodded. You've banished my doubts, old friend. You may not be human, a human, but you are humane. You are, I am sure, capable of a priestly calling. I will do what we set out for. I will make you a priest. A week later, in a small private Sunday service, Bishop Alan Whitcomb fulfilled that promise, and with the laying on of hands, he ordained the Grigory, the fallen angel, Samuel, as a priest, just as he himself had been more than a quarter century before. 3 days after that, Samuel bid his friend and mentor farewell and stepped out of the world. For the next few weeks they met occasionally in dreams as Father Samuel made his otherworldly preparations to descend once more into the realms where, for eons, he had been bound. To the surprise of neither, it was years before they met again. Chapter 5. Chaos at St. Michael's. It took a while to get the identity and all those accounts set up, so by the time Selina and I got back to St. Michael's, I expected to find that the priest had been back for a while. We entered through the north vestibule and could immediately hear loud voices. "Where is he?" demanded a voice I didn't recognize. Taking a few steps more, I spotted one of the stern priests that had come with the bishop earlier. "Not sure, Father," said Henri. "I'm sexton here. I just take care of the church." "It's not a church anymore, so you're a handyman or a caretaker, not a sexton. Now stop stalling." A few more steps and I could see Henri scowling, standing in the choir section. He didn't look at all happy. "I told you, Father, no matter what you call me, I take care of the church, the building, not the man, not Father Gregory." About this time they both heard Selina and me and turned their heads to face us. "So do you know where this Father Gregory is, girl?" demanded the stern priest. "No, sir," I said. He made me so mad I just stopped and pursed my lips like I'd bitten a lemon until I could find a civil tongue. It didn't make him look any happier, just meaner. Taking a deep breath and trying not to use my bad voice, I said, "As you can see, sir, Selina and I just got back from errands, and so far I haven't seen or heard anyone but you." I took another deep breath. "I'm his assistant, Lee. If you'll just stay here with Henri and Selina, I'll go look for him, if that's all right with you." I didn't wait for him to answer. I marched across the choir section and out through the sacristy to the vestry. The father wasn't there, so I continued out the vestry door of the porch, then back through the cloister. As I passed his office windows, I could see that he was sitting at the desk in the office. I stepped into the vestibule and knocked on his office door. "Come in," he called out. Soon as he saw me, he asked, "What's wrong, Lee? Has something happened?" "It's one of the priests that were with the bishop this morning, sir. He's in the church and he's all mad about something." "Is he? Well, that won't do. Can't have him upsetting you. Me and Henri, sir. He was mean to Henri. That won't do at all. Come on, let's see what his problem is. Yes, sir. We headed back to the church, but as soon as we stepped out into the cloister, there he was, the mean priest. Ah, there you are, Father, he said. I wondered where you were hiding. I'm sorry. Is there a problem? A problem? I don't know. Is it a problem that you are masquerading as the mad bishop's phantom priest? Masquerading? I knew that the name Samuel Gregory was familiar, even though we could find no record of a priest by that name. Then you mentioned Bishop Whitcomb. On our way back to the diocese, I realized our mistake. We'd only been looking for living priests. It hadn't occurred to us to look up the fellow who appeared out of nowhere a century ago and then disappeared without a trace 5 years later. So are we supposed to believe that you're that Samuel Gregory, ordained by Bishop Allen Whitcomb a century ago? You asked my name, so I gave it. Whether you believe me or not is of little consequence to me. I am not acting as a member of your church. I am not seeking your approval. As I told the bishop, I am retired. St. Michael's is retired. It is my home. Yes, and you said that your name was Samuel Gregory and that Bishop Whitcomb ordained you. Bishop William Whitcomb never ordained a Samuel Gregory. His grandfather, Bishop Allen Whitcomb, did under odd circumstances and while he was sinking into madness and delusion. Why would you assume the identity of a man who must be long dead by now? What can I say? It is the name I was baptized with, the name I have had as long as I have walked on earth. You may believe me or not, it matters not to me. The other priest glared at him. Now the church no longer owns St. Michael's. You are in my home and you are disturbing its peace and quiet, disturbing me and my employees and friends. I must ask you to leave. Employees? I thought you were retired. The angry priest sneered at him. Father Gregory was about to answer him when there was a terrible racket out front. And I can't resist a cliffhanger or two, so we will find out about the racket next time.